I had just signed away the house my father built with his own 2 hands. When Preston slid a second stack of papers across the table and told me, in the same flat voice he used to order his coffee, that our marriage was over. I remember the pen was still warm in my fingers. I remember the notary, a tired young man named Doug from the title company, packing up his stamp and not quite meeting my eyes, because I think he already understood something I didn't. The wire had gone out that morning. $410,000. My inheritance, my mother's life insurance, and a home equity line against the little brick house in Eau Claire that had been paid off since I was a girl. All of it, gone into Vaughn Industrial to keep the doors open one more quarter. I had done it gladly. I had cried doing it. But they were the good kind of tears. The kind you cry when you get to be useful to the people you love. And now Preston was standing at the head of our own kitchen table with a manila envelope. And his mother Ramona was sitting in the good chair by the window, with her reading glasses pushed up into her silver hair. And there was a young woman I had never seen before, leaning against the counter by the coffee maker, turning a diamond around and around on her left hand so it caught the light. "Sign it," Preston said. "It'll be cleaner for everyone if you don't drag it out." I was 58 years old. I had been married to this man for 11 years, and I sat there in my own kitchen, in the house my grandfather had wired for electricity in 1949, and I could not make my mouth form a single word. Ramona laughed, not a big laugh. A small one through her nose, the kind of laugh a woman gives when a joke has finally landed the way she always knew it would. The young woman by the counter smiled down at her ring. "I want to tell you who I was before Preston. Because I think the woman I used to be makes what happened afterward land harder. And because I've spent 2 years learning that the story doesn't make sense unless you understand how ordinary I was. How easy to overlook. How grateful. My name is Nadine Kessler. I grew up in a farm town outside Eau Claire, Wisconsin. The kind of place where the whole county turned out for the fish fry on Friday. And your business was everyone's business whether you liked it or not. My father ran a small welding and fabrication shop off County Road K. He was not a rich man. He was a careful man, which in western Wisconsin is nearly the same thing as being a wise one. He used to tell me, wiping his hands on a rag that never got clean, "Nadine, get everything in writing, even from people you'd trust with your life. Especially from them." I thought it was just something old men said. I filed it away next, to don't sign the back of a check until you're at the bank, and never co-sign for a man who won't show you the numbers. My mother taught 4th grade for 31 years. My father died of a stroke the winter I turned 44. My mother held on another decade, mostly out of stubbornness, and passed the spring before all of this began. Which matters because I was still raw from burying her when Preston came to me about the company. Grief makes you generous in the worst way. It makes you want to pour yourself into something living, because you've just watched something you loved go still. I met Preston Vaughn when I was 46. By then I'd built a quiet, decent life for myself in Minneapolis. I'd left Wisconsin at 23 with an associate's degree in bookkeeping and a used Corolla, and I'd worked my way up to office manager at a mid-sized dental group in Edina. Good insurance, a 401(a) I actually contributed to, a condo I owned outright. I wasn't lonely, exactly. I had my church choir and my 2 nieces, and a standing Thursday dinner with women I'd known for 20 years. But I was alone, and there's a difference, and Preston found the seam of it right away. We met at a charity gala for the Children's Hospital. I was there because the dental group bought a table every year, and somebody had to represent us. Preston was there representing the family business. Vaughn Industrial, sheet metal and industrial HVAC, founded by his late father Chester back in 1961, 200 employees, a name that meant something in the Twin Cities. He was tall and easy and silver at the temples, and he had that quality certain men have, of making a room feel like it had been assembled around him. He found me at the dessert table, of all places, standing off to the side because I never knew what to do with my hands at those things, and he asked if I was hiding from the speeches too. I should have said yes and gone back to my table so. Instead I laughed. I've thought a lot about that laugh. Preston courted me the way a patient man does a nervous animal. He didn't rush, he called when he said he would. He remembered that I took my coffee with a little cream and no sugar, that my mother's name was Ruth, that I got sentimental about Lake Superior. He came to my choir concerts and sat in the back and clapped like I was somebody. He was 50 then, a widower, no children, and he made his solitude sound like mine. Like two careful people who'd each built a small safe life and were tired of eating dinner alone. Looking back, I understand he was not falling in love with me. He was doing intake. He was learning the shape of me, my defenses and my soft spots, the way a good salesman learns a customer. But you can't see that from inside it. From inside it, it feels like finally, at 46, someone has decided you're worth the trouble. His mother Ramona was another matter. Ramona Vaughn was old money in the way that Minnesota does old money. No flash. Just a cold, bottomless certainty about who belonged and who was visiting. From the first Thanksgiving I could feel her taking my measure and finding me light. A bookkeeper from a fabrication shop in the sticks. She never said it. She didn't have to. She'd ask, gently, whether the dental group offered a pension, and then she'd smile at Preston, like they were sharing a private mercy by having me at the table. We married when I was 47. I sold my condo. Preston said it made sense to consolidate. That his house in Kenwood had room for both of us. And I put the proceeds into a joint account for our future. And I remember Corinne, my oldest friend from my community college days who'd gone on to become an estate attorney down in Rochester, looking at me across her office desk with a face I couldn't read. "You want me to look over anything before you sign it?" she'd asked. "A prenup, a postnup, the account structure?" "Corinne, it's a marriage, not a merger." She'd tapped her pen twice on the blotter. That was all. Just twice. And then she said, "All right, but keep your maiden name on your mother's house. Don't quit claim it into anything. Promise me that one thing." I promised her, mostly to make her stop looking at me like that. I had no idea then that those two taps and that one small stubborn instruction would eventually be the difference between my life ending in a storage unit and my life starting over. The first 8 years were, if not happy, then comfortable. Preston traveled a lot. The company was his whole identity, the last living piece of his father. And I told myself the long hours at the plant and the weekend site visits were just the price of loving an ambitious man. I made his house a home. I learned Ramona's recipes so I could serve them at the family dinners and watch her taste them and say, "Well, close." I filed our taxes, kept our household books. Old habit, I couldn't help it. And I noticed, the way a bookkeeper notices, that Preston's numbers never quite squared with his moods. Good years he'd come home tight and short. Bad years he'd buy me things. Then 3 winters ago Vaughn Industrial started to slide. It came to me in pieces. A comment at dinner about a soft quarter. Then Ramona, of all people, calling me directly, which she'd never done, to say that Chester would be turning in his grave to see the bank, sniffing around his life's work. Then Preston, one night after too much wine, telling me the company was in danger of tripping a covenant on its operating loan. That if the bank called it, 200 families would lose their paychecks before spring. And that the pension the old-timers had been promised, men who'd given Chester 40 years, would evaporate. "We just need a bridge," he said, holding my hand across the table with both of his. 6 months. The order book turns around in the fall, I know it does. But I can't put in more of the family's money without the bank thinking we're desperate. It has to look like outside capital. Clean capital. He looked at me the way he'd looked at me by the dessert table 11 years before. "It has to be you, Nadine. Here is the part I'm not proud of and won't pretend otherwise. I wanted to do it. Not because he asked. Because for the first time in my whole careful life, I got to be the one who saved something." Ruth Kessler's daughter, the bookkeeper from County Road K, holding up 200 families with her own 2 hands. My mother had just died. I was aching to matter. And Vaughn Industrial had those workers, real people, men I'd met at the summer picnic who called me Mrs. V and asked after my nieces. There was a woman named Marisol Vega on the assembly line, whose little boy had cystic fibrosis. And the company insurance was the only reason he was getting the specialists in Rochester. I knew her name, because I'd sat next to her at that picnic. And we'd talked for an hour about our mothers. If the plant closed, Marisol's boy lost his doctors. That's not an abstraction. That's So I said yes, but, and I want you to hear this, because it's the whole hinge of everything. Before I said yes, I did the one thing my father raised me to do. I called Corinne. I told her the whole story. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Nadine, if you're going to do this, you are not going to gift them a dime. And you are not going to sign anything Preston's lawyer drafts. If Vaughn Industrial wants your money, they take it as a secured loan, a promissory note, a real interest rate, a UCC lien on the company's equipment and receivables, and personal guarantees from Preston and from Ramona. And we put a conversion clause in it. If they default on the note, your loan converts to a controlling equity stake. 55%. You either get paid back with interest or you own the company. Those are the only two outcomes you'll accept. Preston will never agree to that, I said. It'll insult him. Then let it insult him, Corinne said. And if he signs it anyway, you'll know something about your marriage you'd better learn now rather than later. I brought Corinne's terms to Preston braced for a fight. I had a whole speech ready about trust and dignity. I didn't need it. He barely looked at the term sheet. He smiled, warm and quick, and said, "Whatever makes you comfortable, sweetheart." Of course, Corinne just doing her job. He signed the personal guarantee in front of me. He got Ramona to sign hers, and Ramona's mouth was a thin white line the whole time, but she signed. Preston's own outside accountant, a soft-spoken CPA named Gerald Whitfield, who'd done Chester's books for 30 years, notarized everything and filed the lien with the Secretary of State. I thought Preston agreed so easily because he loved me. I understand now he agreed so easily because he never intended for that note to survive long enough to matter. In his mind, I was going to be gone. Divorced, discarded, bought off with a nuisance check, long before any default could trigger a conversion. He signed a security agreement that made me the most dangerous creditor his family had, and he signed it grinning, because he genuinely believed I would never have the nerve or the knowledge to use it. Careful men. My father tried to make me one. Chester Vaughn tried to make his son one. Only one of us listened. The money went out on a Tuesday in March. By Friday, Preston brought the papers into our kitchen. I sat there while the young woman by the counter. I would learn within the hour that her name was Sloane, that she was 34. That she was the company's new brand consultant. And that she had been sharing hotel rooms with my husband for the better part of 2 years. Kept turning her ring toward the window. It was a big diamond. Bigger than mine. I noticed that, and then I was ashamed of noticing it. And then I stopped being ashamed. Because it turns out noticing things is the only thing that saved me. Preston laid it out for me like a board meeting. He'd already spoken with a lawyer. The house in Kenwood was his, from before the marriage. There would be a generous settlement. He actually used the word generous. Of $50,000, in exchange for which I would sign a full release, waive any claim to marital assets, and, he said, sliding one particular page to the top of the stack, release and discharge any and all financial instruments between yourself and Vaughn Industrial. Meaning the note. Meaning my $410,000. Meaning my mother's house, which I'd borrowed against. You want me to tear up the loan, I said. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone in the next room. I want us to start fresh, Preston said. Both of us. Cleanly. He set a check on the table on top of the release. $50,000. My team spelled right, which somehow was the cruelest detail of all. This is more than fair, Nadine. Take it and go home to Wisconsin. There's nothing left for you here. Ramona spoke then, from her chair by the window. You were always going to end up back in Eau Claire, dear, she said, not unkindly, which made it worse. Some of us are just passing through this kind of life. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Sloane laughed softly at her ring. And I understood, sitting there, that the last 11 years had not been a marriage. They had been an acquisition. Preston hadn't fallen for a lonely bookkeeper at a dessert table. He'd found an asset. A woman with clean money, a paid-off house, no children to complicate an estate, no living parents to ask hard questions, and a bone-deep need to be useful that a clever man could aim like a tool. He'd waited 11 years for the quarter he'd need me. He'd married the whole time thinking of this Friday. I didn't cry. I think I was too far past crying, the way you get when the pain is so total it goes quiet. I looked at the check and the release, and the page that would erase my father's raised voice. Get everything in writing, Nadine. And I did the only thing I could think to do. I'd like to read it before I sign, I said. All of it. It's a lot of pages. Preston sighed like a man being patient with a slow child. Take your time, he said, and he checked his watch. And he and Ramona and Sloane went out to the sun porch to wait. And I heard the cork come out of a bottle, and I heard the three of them murmuring and, once, laughing. And I sat alone at my own table, and I did not read a single word of that release. I texted Corinne. 3 words. Do not sign. Wait, that was hers to me. I sent her. They serve papers. He wants the note torn up. And then I sat with my hands flat on the table to keep them from shaking, and I waited. She called back in 90 seconds. Are you alone? They're on the sun porch. Don't touch the check. Don't sign anything, not even to acknowledge receipt. I'm calling Gerald right now. Gerald? Whitfield. The accountant. There was something in her voice I'd never heard in 30 years of friendship, a low, coiled readiness, like a woman who'd been waiting a long time for a door to finally open. Nadine, I need you to listen to me carefully. Have they told you why the company suddenly needed your money in March of all months? A covenant. The bank. There was no covenant problem in March, Corinne said. I've had a paralegal pull the public filings since you first called me. Vaughn Industrial's real trouble is that money has been leaving the company for 2 years into a separate LLC that Preston set up in Delaware. The bank got suspicious this winter and ordered a forensic audit before it would renew the operating loan. Preston needed to show clean capital on the books before the auditors arrived, to paper over the hole he'd dug. And he needed it fast. And he needed it to look like an arm's-length investment, not a plug from the family. That's what you were, Nadine. You weren't saving the company from the bank. You were laundering Preston's theft past the auditors. I sat very still. And here's the part he doesn't understand yet, she said. And now there was almost a smile in it. Diverting company funds into that side, LLC, is a default event under your note. Article 6. The one you thought was boilerplate. The second he moved that money, your loan's conversion right went live. It's been live for 2 years. You don't have to sue him to own that company. You already do, you just have to invoke it. I heard faintly, slow laughing on the sun porch. There's a man at your door in about 20 minutes, Corinne said. Let him in. Gerald Whitfield arrived in 22. I let him in the side door quietly, while Preston and his mother and his mistress toasted my exit on the porch. Gerald was maybe 65, stooped, with a soft voice, and the sort of unhurried calm that belongs to men who've been the one holding the real numbers in a room full of people lying to themselves. He'd done Chester Vaughn's books for 30 years. He'd notarized my note, and, it turned out, he'd been quietly sick to his stomach for 2 years watching Chester's son loot Chester's company. He set his briefcase on my kitchen table, right where the divorce papers still sat, and he moved them aside with 2 fingers, gently, like they were something spoiled. Mrs. Kessler, he said. He used my maiden name. And I realized it was the first time in 11 years anyone in that family had. I want to tell you some things while your husband is still on the property, because once he understands what I'm about to tell you, he is going to do everything he can to move money he shouldn't move. So I'd rather you hear it from me directly. He sat down. He pulled out a folder. And in that soft accountant's voice he laid it out the way Corinne had, but with the documents, the actual pages, the wire records and the intercompany transfers, and the Delaware filings and the forged financial statement Preston had submitted to the bank. A statement Gerald had refused to sign, which was why they'd stopped inviting Gerald to the important meetings. He forged the auditor's engagement letter, Gerald said quietly, and he signed a bank certification attesting to figures he knew were false. That's not a divorce matter, Mrs. Kessler. Submitting a falsified financial statement to a federally insured bank to obtain credit is bank fraud. It's federal, and the money he moved into that side entity triggered the conversion clause in your note 2 years ago. As of this moment, you have the right to convert your loan into 55% of Vaughn Industrial. You are, functionally, the majority owner of this company. He just handed you divorce papers on the same afternoon you became his boss. I remember the light in the kitchen. Late March light, thin and gold, coming through the window Ramona was no longer sitting in. I remember something cracking open in my chest that had nothing to do with grief. The workers, I said. It was the first thing I thought of. If I do this, if I invoke it, does the company survive? The 200 people. Is there enough left, or did he take it all? Gerald looked at me for a long moment, and something in his tired face softened. That, he said, is the first question anyone in that family has asked me in 2 years that somebody other than themselves. He nodded slowly. The core business is sound. The hole is Preston's theft, not the operations. Take out the man bleeding it and it survives. Marisol Vega keeps her insurance. Everyone keeps their check. He paused. You can save it, Mrs. Kessler, for real this time, not as cover for a fraud. For real. I stood up. My knees weren't quite steady, but they held. And I picked up Preston's $50,000 check off my kitchen table and I looked at it. And I set it back down without folding it. Because I wanted it to be found there exactly like that. Corinne arrived while I was still standing there. She'd driven up from Rochester in 85 minutes, still in her courtroom blazer, and she came through the front door like weather. She took one look at me, and at Gerald, and at the papers, and at the $50,000 check lying face up on the table, and her whole face went still and certain. Tell me they haven't left, she said. They're on the sun porch, I said, drinking my wine. Corinne set down her bag. Good. Then they can hear it in person. I walked out onto the sun porch with Corinne 2 steps ahead of me and Gerald behind. And I want you to know I did it in the same cardigan I'd been wearing all day. No makeup fixed, my eyes still swollen. Because I was done performing for those people. Preston looked up with the last of his easy smile still on his face. Sloane had her feet tucked under her on my wicker chair like she already lived there. Ramona was pouring. That was quick, Preston said. I told you it'd be cleaner if... Corinne introduced herself. She has a particular voice for this, I've since learned. A low and pleasant voice that somehow lands like a door closing. I represent Miss Kessler, she said. I wanted to deliver a few items in person before your client. She nodded at Preston. Moves any assets tonight, which I'd strongly advise against, given what's already documented. She handed Preston a folder. His name was on it. That's formal notice of Miss Kessler's election to convert her secured note into a controlling equity interest in Vaughn Industrial, pursuant to the default triggered by the transfers into your Delaware entity in the spring of 2 years ago. Effective immediately, she holds 55%. You'll also find notice that a forensic accounting firm has been retained, that Mr. Whitfield has agreed to cooperate fully, and that the falsified financial certification submitted to First Northern Bank has been referred to counsel for evaluation as a federal matter. I watched something go out of Preston's face. Not all at once. In layers. First the smile, then the color, then, underneath all of it, the thing I'd never once seen in 11 years. The naked, scrambling calculation of a man who has just realized the plan didn't fail somewhere down the line. It failed at the beginning. It failed the day I called Corinne. He stood up. The wineglass in his hand was shaking, just slightly. Nadine, sweetheart, this is a misunderstanding. Whitfield doesn't know what Gerald knows exactly what he's talking about, I said. My own voice surprised me, it didn't shake at all. He's known for 2 years. He just didn't have anyone worth telling. Ramona set down the bottle. Her face had gone the gray of old snow. You have no standing here, she said, and her voice had lost its silk. This is Chester's company. You're a bookkeeper. I'm a bookkeeper who read the note, I said. You signed a personal guarantee, Ramona. So did Preston. That means when the forensic audit finds what Gerald says it'll find, the 2 of you are personally on the hook for it. Not the company. You. I looked at her. This woman who'd spent 11 years letting me know I was only passing through. You should have let me feel like family. Family you don't investigate quite so carefully. Sloane had gone quiet on the wicker chair. The ring was still on her hand, but she'd stopped turning it toward the light, and I watched her understand in real time that she'd bet her future on a man who was about to have nothing, and that the diamond she was wearing had probably been bought with money stolen from the very workers whose pension he'd invoked to guilt me into saving him. She stood up without a word, gathered her coat, and walked out through the house to the front door. And none of us stopped her, and I never saw her again. I heard later that she'd moved to Scottsdale. I found, somewhat to my surprise, that I didn't care at all. Preston tried, for another few minutes, to be reasonable, that boardroom voice reaching for the version of himself I'd once believed in. Let's talk about this like adults, he said. There's a number that makes this go away for everyone. There isn't, Corinne said pleasantly. That's the thing about federal bank fraud. It's not the kind of problem money makes go away. It's the kind money made in the first place. The forensic audit took 4 months. It found everything Gerald said it would and more. The Delaware LLC, the fake vendor invoices routing company, cash to accounts. Preston controlled. The personal expenses run through the business. Sloane's consulting contract for work no one could document. It found the falsified statement to First Northern, which is what turned it from an ugly divorce into a federal case. The U.S. Attorney's Office took it up within the year. I won't pretend the legal machinery was clean or fast. It wasn't. Preston's first lawyers tried to argue the marriage had been entered in good faith, and the note was a gift dressed up as a loan by a scheming wife. Which fell apart the moment Discovery turned up his own communications. There were emails, Corinne found them, going back to before he ever walked up to me at that dessert table. He'd met me on purpose. A mutual acquaintance had mentioned, at some earlier event, a sad, sweet Kessler woman who'd inherited a paid-off house and a nice little state and had no kids and no living parents. Preston had asked follow-up questions. He'd looked up my condo's assessed value on the county site before he'd ever heard my laugh. He'd noted, in one message to a college friend I've never met, that I was low maintenance, financially clean, and lonely enough to be grateful. He hadn't found me by the windows and asked if I was hiding. He'd hunted me, patiently and well. And then he'd waited 11 years to butcher me for parts. Reading those emails was worse than the divorce papers. The papers only told me my marriage was over. The emails told me it had never begun. But here is what I did with the company, and it's the part I'm actually proud of. More than the courtroom parts. I could have looted it. Corinne, in her lawyer way, laid out the option. Strip the assets, sell it for parts, walk away rich and let the workers scatter. It would have been legal. It would even have been a kind of justice. And I stood in the plant one morning that summer, on the floor where Chester Vaughn had started with 3 men, and a brake press in 1961. And I watched Marisol Vega running her line, and I thought about her boy in Rochester with his specialists, and I couldn't do it. I kept the company. I brought Gerald out of semi-retirement to run the books straight. I hired a real operator, a plant manager named Dolores Aguirre, who'd been passed over for years because she wasn't a Vaughn and wasn't a man, and I gave her the reins and the title and the salary that came with it. We clawed back what we could of the stolen money. We honored every pension Chester had promised. I put that in writing, ironclad, because I am my father's daughter. 2 years on, Vaughn Industrial is smaller and slower and completely solvent, and it belongs, on paper, to a bookkeeper from County Road K, and every single one of those 200 people still gets a check. And Marshasal's boy is doing well enough that she sent me a photo of him at his 8th birthday, gap-toothed and laughing over a sheet cake, and I have it on my refrigerator to this day. Preston pled out in the end, the way men like him do when the evidence is a wall. A felony, restitution, a sentence that was real even if it was shorter than it should have been. Ramona's personal guarantee came due, and Chester's widow, who'd spent her life certain of who belonged, had to sell the house in Kenwood to satisfy it. She lives in a condo in Edina now, not far from the dental group where I used to answer phones. I'm told she doesn't go out much. I don't feel triumphant about that. I don't feel much of anything about her anymore, which after 11 years of trying to earn her approval, is its own kind of freedom. I want to tell you where I am now, because I think it matters. I stepped back from running Vaughn Industrial about a year ago. Dolores has it well in hand, and I found I didn't need to sit at the head of the table. I only needed to know the table was honest. I sold my majority stake to an employee ownership trust, so that the people who make the thing own the thing, which is what Chester probably should have done in the first place, and never quite trusted anyone enough to do. I paid off the equity line on my mother's house. I still own it, free and clear, the brick house on County Road K, and I go back there some weekends and sit on the porch my grandfather built, and I don't feel lonely there anymore. I feel like the last one standing who remembers. I bought a small place on the Bayfield Peninsula, up on Lake Superior, where the water my mother loved goes on past where you can see. I do a little consulting now, pro bono mostly, for a legal aid clinic that helps people, women mostly, who've been financially cornered by the people they trusted. Coerced signatures, hidden accounts, husbands and sons and business partners who confuse love with leverage. I know that trap from the inside, and it turns out that's worth something to a frightened person across a desk. I tell them what my father told me and what Corinne told me. Get it in writing, especially from the ones you'd trust with your life. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm healed, because I don't think that's true, and I've come to distrust anyone who says it too easily. There are still nights up on the lake when I lie awake and do the arithmetic of 11 years. The choir concerts he sat through, the coffee he remembered, the whole long patient performance of a man learning me well enough to gut me. And something in my chest goes cold and small. He was so good at it. That's the part that stays with me. Not that he was cruel, that he was patient, that the cruelty was so beautifully disguised as tenderness that I'd have sworn on my mother's grave it was real. But then I think about that photograph on my refrigerator. A boy with a gap in his teeth, 8 years old, laughing, alive. Still seeing his doctors because a plant full of people kept their insurance. Because a bookkeeper from a fabrication shop happened to remember one thing her father told her about getting everything in writing. My money went somewhere real, in the end. It went somewhere it was wanted. And the people who looked at me and saw only what they could take. A clean balance sheet. A paid-off house. A lonely woman too grateful to check the fine print. They found out the hard way that the careful, overlooked ones are exactly the ones you should never underestimate. We're the only ones still reading the contract after everyone else has stopped. So I'll ask you what I've asked myself on those cold nights by the water, and I mean it as a real question, not a tidy ending. If a man could spend 11 patient years building an entire life around you, just to take the one thing he wanted and leave you the bill, would you have seen it coming? Or does the kind of betrayal that actually ruins you always arrive wearing the face of someone who loves you?